right, hello everyone. Welcome to the Born a Goon channel. Today, guys, I am going to give you my honest owner's review about that bike right there. My 2019 Triumph Tiger 800 XCX model. I'm going to tell you everything I like about this bike, the things I dislike about this bike, and I'm not going to pull any punches when it comes to talking about this thing. Now, I apologize, it is a little bit dirty, but I guess that's okay. It's an adventure bike. They should be dirty. They kind of look good that way. Now, some of you might remember, it was several months ago that I did a first impressions review on this bike when I first bought it. Now, since then, I'm just about 2 months shy of 1 year ownership of this thing. I've got about 3,800 miles in it. And it's been in just about every type of riding condition imaginable. I've had this thing in the mud. I've had it in the rain. I've had it in the tight forest single tracks. I've spent a lot of time in Southern California deserts, going through deep sand, rough, rocky, abusive terrain. I've done long distance solo trips on this and occasionally used it as a commuter bike. So the only thing that I think I haven't had this in is the snow. And maybe one day it'll get its chance. So since that time, there are some things that have stood out on this bike that impress me, and quite frankly, there's some things that depress me, and I'm going to go through those with you in detail. Now, when I share this with you, I want you to understand this is coming from the viewpoint of the type of riding that I'm doing, and there may be a conflict from what Triumph had built this bike for and the intended use that this bike is for, and how I ultimately ended up using it, regardless of what my best intentions might have been. And you'll learn that here in just a second. So let me give you just a brief background of the type of rider that I am so you understand where I'm coming from. This is my first adventure bike, but it's not my first motorcycle by any means. I started out as a 5-year-old kid on a dirt bike. My dad bought me this QA50. I'm now 50 years old. And I rode that thing religiously almost every day. A couple years later, when I'm 8 years old, he gets me an RM100 and I start racing. And we pretty much just traveled the countryside racing my dirt bike all the way up until I was 25 years old. I even did a couple of AMA outdoor nationals. So I'm not like the greatest dirt bike rider in the world, but I do know a little bit about these. Now, towards the end of my little riding stint with dirt bikes, when I got out of motocross, a friend turned me on to road racing, where I really spent a lot of my time. I took to that real quickly. I fell in love with that sport, and I spent from that time all the way up till I was 45 racing all over I did an AMA Supermoto race. I did an AMA Super Sport race. So I've kind of been around the block with bikes. Now, how I ended up going with an adventure bike was not like a midlife crisis or an old man's thing. One of my side hobbies is I love like backpacking and camping. So as I was doing this, it didn't take long when you're out there on the trail going, hey, if I had one of them there adventure bikes, I bet I could really get off the grid. So when I originally went to buy this bike, or I was looking at a few of them, I was looking at the KTM 1090R, I was looking at the Africa Twin, and this one. I ultimately chose this one because I said in that first impressions video, I did some races on a Daytona 675. I have a street triple and a speed triple. I really just love that triple motor and the way they perform, the sound of the Triumphs. I'm just sort of like really love the brand and everything. So I kind of leaned to this one, not so much for performance, because I think I would have got more aggressive off-road performance definitely with the KTM. I would have more torque with the twin engine motors, even from the Africa Twin. But that's the reason why I went with it. And also I think it's pretty sexy. Now, when I first got the bike, my intention for this thing was to just do light, and I'm like using air quotes back here. I know you can't see me. Like light off-roading. And I was just going to kind of putt around with it. But I was born a goon. I mean, I can't help myself. And I mean, some of us, that's just the way we are. We just get on a bike and we just twist the wrist. I mean, what are we supposed to do with these things? We just start going hooligan on them. I know not everybody's like that. But I've sort of just really taken this thing and I'm just doing heavy single tracks, really rough, rocky stuff. And this bike is not built for that. It's some cosmetic things here that are really, really fragile on it. We'll go over those in just a little bit. But let's start out by talking about the display. We'll go from the top to the bottom and work our way down. So, you know what? Screw this. Why don't we just ride the damn bike? How about that? I'm going to sit here and talk about it. On the road is where this bike really shines. This 3-cylinder engine purrs like a horny lion and will devour highway miles. It has an incredibly soft and comfortable seat. It has a lot of great touring amenities that come right from the factory, such as a heated seat, cruise control, heated grips, an easy to use and easy to read TFT display, and a nice extended windscreen. The chassis on this bike is also very nimble, so if you want to keep up with your buddies in the canyons or you want to do some aggressive canyon riding, this bike has no problems doing that either. Even with a set of full aggressive off-road knobbies, it's no problem whatsoever to drag peg on just about any corner. So the chassis, the road performance, the ergonomics, the fueling and the fuel injection on this bike are the standout features of a Triumph. So if you're really looking to spend most of your time on the highway or carving it up into canyons or just getting out there in nature, this bike will serve the purpose. Also, the bike performs well on sketchy roads, on back roads that are maybe covered in dust or are part pavement and part loose gravel, part rocky, and even on fire roads, the bike handles really well. So if you're looking for that sort of comfort along with performance when it comes to the road, when it comes to moderate fire roads, it's going to be hard to beat this bike. The overall comfort, the overall quality of the components that are used on this bike are fantastic. So if that's where you're going to spend a lot of your time, this is a great choice. All right, we're going to start out talking about the electronics on this bike, the rider modes, and the traction control, which I have a beef with, and I'm going to demonstrate what I'm talking about here in just a second. It's going to be hard for me to show you each one of them, because the other day while I was out in the desert, the toggle switch that controls these just fell off. Now, I called my local dealers, all the dealers in my area, and said, can I just buy this switch? And they told me no, that they don't sell just this switch. You got to buy the whole entire electronical unit, which is like $250. So I called Triumph, talked to their customer service for a while. They told me the same thing. So as it stands now, you got to buy the whole entire unit. You just can't get this cheap old plastic switch. And that's like $250, but the unit works fine. It just doesn't have a switch. So I'm going to have to come up with something to fix this. Now, where the problem is, you're going to see here in just a second with this traction control, is it comes on at the slightest touch of the throttle. Your default mode when you turn the engine off is this road mode. Now the problem with this is the other day when I was out in the desert, I was in Off-Road Pro mode. That's the only mode on this bike where you can disengage all of the electronics. So what happened is I was in this deep sand out in the desert. Now my toggle switch falls off and the bike sticks me in default mode, and it's hard as hell to get out of that deep sand because the traction control just kept kicking in and out. I ended up having to be towed out by a car practically. I mean, it was an absolute nightmare. A rare scenario, obviously, but it happened. I mean, how crazy is that? So here's what I want you to look at. I'm just going to take this turn. You can see it's like 95 degrees outside. So we're on pavement. It's dry here in Southern California. This is perfect grip conditions. Even though I got full knobbies on this bike, I don't think I'm going to be able to show you my throttle hand, but I'm just going to give it a light amount of throttle like this. And I want you to watch right here on the screen. You're going to see when this traction control engages. And here's what I want you to look at. When you twist this throttle, it immediately engages this traction control. And there's like no way the rear tire is slipping in these types of conditions at the speed I'm going. You're going to see that. The other problem with that is when it does it, it really drops the RPMs on this bike to where you feel like you just chopped the throttle. So like if you're in a condition where I was at the desert, or you're going up a hill and you're using the traction control or whatever, once it starts to break traction, it just shuts the motor off and you're going to lose all of that forward momentum. So when I was in this deep sand, I'm just stuck because I've got no way to get out of it because I can't even get the bike to take off from the deep sand because the traction control keeps kicking in. So here's the rider modes. I can see if I can toggle it here with my thumb here. There's your rain mode, road mode. Only the Off-Road Pro, yes, it's real hard. Only this Off-Road Pro is the only mode I've been riding in because it's the only one that removes the electronics on the bike. And to be honest with you, there isn't enough torque in this bike to really need traction control. But just watch this part. You'll see when I go around this corner up here. Watch how quickly that this engages right here. Just right here on the screen. Let's see if we can get out here on the road. You'll see it won't take much. I'm just going to do like a moderate little turn here. Now watch it. See it? See how that just came on right away. Again, it's 90 degrees outside. It shouldn't be like that. All right, we're going to do a little bit of tight single track, some moderate single track here. I'll show you what this thing can do off-road. And I had to kind of mess around here with the switch a little bit with a stick and a rock to get it into Off-Road Pro. And that's why the bike's running, because if I turn it off, we're going to be in street mode, and that's just not going to work out here. Now, I know this is not why Triumph built a motorcycle, and if this is the kind of ride you're going to do a lot, you're better off with an enduro bike or something a little more aggressive. But maybe you find yourself out and you want to explore and you want to know, can your bike do this? And the answer is yes, the bike can handle this, and it handles it really well for what it is. Where the shortcomings obviously are is not just the weight of the bike, but how this bike carries its weight. You can see that it retains its sporty side that makes it so brilliant on the highway as its rake and trail. It's sort of sport bike, stink bug-like, high rear, lower front. And if you look at the gas tank, it slopes forward as well. So when there's a full tank of gas, you've got all that weight pressing forward, so it's front heavy. Now where that comes in to play on a bike like this is if you look at a section here, if you're on a enduro bike or an aggressive motorcycle, or maybe even like a KTM 1090 with some serious power, you could come in here and you could clutch it or seat bounce it and just clear this whole thing. That's how normally I would do it, or skip through it like it's a series of whoops. On a bike like this, you can't do that. I mean, maybe you can, but I can't. And you kind of have to single this. That's where it gets irritating. If you jump any of this stuff, the bike just kind of bottoms out. So if I was on a dirt bike, I would just seat bounce this and just blitz right through it like it was no problem. But a bike like this struggles because when you have that speed and because of the torque on this bike, it's hard to lift that front wheel up. So I would like to just kind of 12 o'clock it and roll right through. So when you see stuff like that, you kind of have to nurse it through. And if you do blitz through it, like I said, it's painful because the bike just bottoms out. So anyway, let's ride through here and show you. So it handles pretty good through this stuff. You know, even through these tight rocks, it's not hard. You know, and anytime you want to turn it, you just kind of hit the gas, and you can steer it with the rear. See, it'll just practically bottom out there. Or tough whoops like this, they get really tough on the bike. You kind of have to single them a little. But as far as the handling of the bike, it's not bad at all. See, it just spins. Woo! But see, it'll go through this stuff, you know. See, there's another spot where I would just like to wheelie right through, but also when you hit these in a jump format, the nose on this just dives. It's just so front heavy. But see, it'll chug along. I'm in second gear right here. You can just kind of putt through here. And then if you need power, you just give it a go. And it'll handle these obstacles. I mean, it takes an awful lot of leg and an awful lot of body to ride a bike like this. through this stuff. But, like I said, we'll do it. See, I wish I could just jump over that right there. Let's try this one. Yeah, see, it bottom out just like that right there. One thing you want to try not to do, obviously, on these is lose your momentum and stall the bike, because these things are heavy as hell to pick up. You just sort of have to let it roll down the hill like that, you know? It's already exhausting enough to ride. If you got to pick it up a few times, that's a pain in the ass. But this bike can handle it. I'm getting tired. All right, now that we're done with our ride, let me talk a little bit about some modifications I've made to this bike. Some modifications that if I decide to keep it, that I feel I'm going to need to make to this bike. And of course, my number one beef about this bike. But before I do, that's a hell of a picture right there, isn't it? Sun is setting, it's in its natural element. And as you see, this thing is pretty good off-road. I know it's not the most accurate weapon for that type of riding, and that's not why Triumph built that bike. But if you find yourself wanting to do some tight single tracks, the bike will do it. It's definitely physical. It's a lot of work, but the bike can do it. So the first modification I made to this bike was I dropped a tooth in the front for a little bit more torque. And I said this in the initial impressions video, the bike is pretty weak off the bottom. On paper, the numbers sound good, but with the electronics and everything, the bike is just really, really subtle down low, and I wanted a little bit more punch. That definitely helped. It gets the bike to loft its front wheel up in certain occasions, and it's really nice that way. And you have a ton of mid-range and a ton of top end if you want to sacrifice that up there, because this bike will just redline to infinity and just keep on clicking and clicking and trucking and all that kind of stuff. Now, if I decide to keep it, I'm going to add a tooth to the rear. When I dropped the tooth, it extended the wheelbase on this a little bit, so that even makes it more difficult when you're riding through that terrain that I was just riding through. It adds a little bit more highway stability, but I think I'd want to sacrifice that for the nimbleness. Now, you see I've got some Pirelli Scorpion Rally tires. This is the 50/50 tire. It's a very aggressive tire, and it works pretty good on the street like you saw. A little bit wobbly at high speeds, and obviously wobbly under heavy acceleration on the road. Now, as far as off-road, it works pretty good, but it seems like the first 1,500 miles of its life is when it works real good off-road. Everything after that, it's starting to get very slippery, and I've got about 2,000 miles on this, and you can see they're just about done. And I'm not doing burnouts, just highway riding and some trail riding like this, and they're just shot. And I think I'd want something, maybe go with a Mitas. I don't know, but I don't think I'm going to go with this tire again. Works pretty good, but tire life on this is questionable. The other thing I did, let's scoot over here, was I put this upper crash bar on. I'm going to talk about this thing in a second, because when I did the initial impressions video, one of the things I talked about was I dropped this thing, just taking pictures of it the first day I got it, and it cracked all this stuff. Now, on that note, that, guys, is my biggest beef with this. Engine-wise, component-wise, I feel this bike will be durable and dependable. Like I said, I had a couple other Triumphs. They got 20,000 miles on them. that's not my concern. My biggest concern is that this thing is cosmetically fragile. I have probably dropped this thing a total of 4 times. And when I say drop, it's maybe just slightly faster than where it's going right now. They're just either fell over on the kickstand or just a half a mile an hour tip over. I have never like legitimately wrecked this bike. So the first time it fell over on the stand while I was taking pictures with it, it totally busted this upper cowling right here. You can see it's got a crack in it, but this whole thing behind it, if you pull it up, is Velcro and Gorilla Glue. There's like Velcro I've got holding this on here, which, believe it or not, it works pretty damn good. And I'll eventually have to replace this, but for right now, and they're kind of riding, I'm doing like, heck with it, I'll just try to recycle it. The bigger problem was this lower fairing totally got squashed. I mean, it incinerated, and it's made out of PVC. So what I did was I kind of sanded it down, cleaned it up, and I painted it with Plasti Dip. This is Plasti Dip on here. Now there's a lot, it's not a Plasti Dip video, but hey, some people say this stuff is no good. I put this stuff through the mill and look at it, it's still on there. And I actually like the gunmetal collar so well from it. I painted the other side so it would match. So I actually kind of like the look of that. Now, that was on the first time that I dropped it, and of course it broke the turn signal. And the biggest problem, or the biggest dirty nasty thing, was it put a small dent right here in the tank, which just pissed me off. It just fallen over here on the stand, and of course it broke this lever right here. Now the second time that I dropped this bike, it annihilated this turn signal here. It just broke this turn signal off. And I guess that's to be expected. Those Triumph turn signals were long, so I kind of put some smaller turn signals here on it, some like tidier, cleaner ones. The first time I ever hit the pan down on the bottom, it dented it. I don't know if you can see it, but it dented the hell out of that thing, so it's not very durable either. But on the third time that I dropped it was the absolute pissiest worst for me, and I'll tell you what happened. And this is something that I overlooked when I got the bike. You see this lower crash protector, and you can actually see the scuffs. It was a pretty hard fall because it fell off an off-camber area onto a rock. But what it did was, I thought it knocked this thing loose, but I'm going to try to zero in there. I hope the camera can focus. This piece that holds this on is connected to the engine. This thing has been molded into the lower casing of the bike. So when this thing hit, it tore the bolt out and snapped this piece that you screw it into. And the only way that you can replace that is you got to get a lower case. So you'd have to crack this motor, buy a brand new lower case, and put it on. And if you can even see closer right here, it smashed up against this thing right here and actually tore some of the coating off of the engine. And this was not even, it was at a standstill. It was just because it was heavy. I lost my balance trying to turn around, and down she went. And that thing just got toasted. I mean, it just broke, and I had to JB weld this, and so far it's held, but I haven't had a really hefty dump. And it also, that's not a good hefty dump, and it also scratched up this thing. So it seems like every time this bike goes down, something gets broken, like some cosmetic thing gets damaged, something gets broken. This is also connected to that piece. So if I decide I want to keep this bike, what I'm going to have to do is, I think it's Hepco Becker, if I'm pronouncing that right. There's a couple of manufacturers that make an upper and a lower that don't connect to that engine. To me, that is a horrible design. I pointed out the flaws that most people know with the passenger pegs, but I knew about that when I bought it. This is an oversight, and it doesn't, and what I'm saying here is it doesn't take very much for you to break that. Like the fall wasn't that hard. I've had much harder falls, and for some reason it just got it right and snapped that. And so far the JB Weld's holding it, but I'm not going to sit here and spend the money to break down the engine and buy a new casting for that. That's just ignorant. So that's my biggest beef with this bike, is that it just feels like every time that it falls over, you've got to repair something. It either dents the bike, cracks this plastic, or just does significant damage to it. But I guess the best way I could sum this up is, this is a great bike for what it is, but what it is ain't what I am, if that makes sense. I think for the type of riding that I'm doing, And where I'm taking this bike, I would be best off maybe with the 790 or maybe even something more aggressive like the 690 Enduro R. I'm going to have to make that decision, but I think if I continue to ride off-road like this, even mildly, this bike's just literally going to fall apart and look like hell beat over. Now, you definitely can replace all the plastics and get the tanks fixed and all that stuff. It's just a motorcycle. They're relatively easy to work on, but it gets in the back of your mind when you're riding it. Not only don't want to dump it because it's so heavy to pick back up, but then you don't want to dump the thing because it's like, oh, it's probably going to break. But other than that, the machine's been durable as far as the engine starting. I haven't had any problems with it like that. The highway is definitely a beautiful thing. It's got the heated grips, the cruise control. You can get the heated seat for it. It's a cushy, comfy seat. So if your intention is to go out and do mainly highway miles and light fire roads, I'd give this bike a shot because it rides real well on the freeway. It handles these off-road conditions pretty good for what it is, especially fire roads. When you get into the tight single tracks, that's where its deficiencies come in, obviously, because of the weight. But on the highway, it's brilliant. It's comfortable. You don't get a lot of engine heat coming out of there. You get a lot of things from the factory with this bike, like the skid plate, the lower crash bars, the heated grips, like I said, the cruise control, rider modes, the TFT display is awesome. But, you know, when I got it, I thought I was going to be able to putt around a little bit more and be a little bit more gentle, but I just, even at my age here, I just don't think that's where I'm headed. So I'll probably end up getting something a little more aggressive, and I'll keep you updated. So thanks for listening to this video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. I'm going to start doing some trips on these types of bikes and documenting things. If you have any tips, comments, suggestions, quarrels, make sure you send them right there. Put them down in the comment box. Thanks again. Don't be born again. Be born a goon.